was real. Listen.
Hi, I'm Traci.
And I'm Kathy.
And this is Curious Explorers. So, hi, Kath.
Hey, Trace. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I was going to say happy, scary New Year.
Spooky New Year.
Spooky New Year. We should do something next year for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Or maybe this time next year we should look at the Yeti or some sort of winter appropriate,
Yeah.
Krampus. Now we need to do the Yeti, I think.
Something more, maybe Freya or some kind of Nordic thing, or like the Yule goat, something like that.
I never even heard of the Yule goat. So for people who are not in the Northeast and suffering under this 9 degrees with the wind chill thing. And by the way, I know Canadians are like, it's not that bad,
It is for us, okay?
For us, it's like people in Florida when it's 65 degrees and they're like, oh, I'm so cold. But I digress. But I was thinking last year at this time, we were in Gettysburg.
That's
freezing our butts off.
Yeah, it was really cold then too. Yeah.
Oh my God, it was awful. And
I still don't think it was as cold as it is now, though. I mean, it is
was close.
Today's the coldest day I think I've ever felt. Even my dogs, I took them for a walk and they were like, "No, let's go. Let's get back inside."
I wonder if hell has frozen over. I don't know.
Exactly.
It kind of feels like it. Yeah, maybe. So another episode, maybe we'll chat more about Gettysburg. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because we had this huge expedition weekend planned. And literally we're on the highway driving 4 hours in a blizzard last year. Hotel canceled on us. And we're like, well, we're halfway there and we can't really see to get back. So
exactly,
we'll figure it out.
It ended up clearing up too. That's what's so funny. We got there and it was sunny. It was still very cold, but the snow stopped.
Ghosts were kind of sluggish. It wasn't as haunted as it usually is.
Yeah, the ghosts were like, we'll scare you next year. Never mind.
It's too cold.
No, it's too cold.
So today, what I actually wanted to talk about with you is, by the way, I don't think it's super scary at all. But I think when we get to the end, I'm going to ask you some questions that might make you and our listeners think about some scary possibilities. So today I want to talk about energy healing. I mean, it is an esoteric topic, somewhat. It's an important topic. So I wanted to cover some of what has happened in that realm, but then also look at the flip side. Because what does it mean if you can heal somebody? So we'll get to that.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm mousing over here because I wrote copious notes. But, I was looking at a variety of different scientific articles because there are, the criticism or a primary criticism of energy healing is one that there's, the skeptics with a capital S will say, well, it's not possible. So no matter what you show me, I won't believe it.
I'm sorry, but that noise you heard was the profound rolling of my eyes where they practically screwed out of my head. So
I can't see you because I'm looking at my document. So I was not really
if
sure
anyone else can see me, they're going to be like, it's literally going to be, they know exactly what's going on in my head because my eyes just rolled practically out of them.
Seriously. And listen, I get it. You're talking about a phenomenon that you cannot see, right? And it's not something really directly quantifiable and so forth. But what we'll talk about today is some of the evidence and some of the thought-provoking kind of questions about energy healing, right? Because there is some data. There are actually a number of studies. And I just thought, wow, it's something you and I have talked about, but we haven't talked about on the show. So, I was reading an article, one of the many scientific papers by Dr. William Bengston. And for people who think that name might sound familiar, it's because he was a capital S skeptic, and he is a laboratory scientist. And he, through a long series of odd things, wound up meeting a healer, who was able to do incredible things, cure his lifelong back pain in one kind of inadvertent session almost. and do these other things. And he studied what this person could do in the laboratory. And Bill Bengston's line of research was primarily at the time looking at, what would be effective against specific mammary cell cancer lines, so breast cancer lines. And there are some that if you inoculate mice with these cancer cells, they follow a very, predetermined path. They have a certain number of days that they live. There are not drugs that reduce, or actually rather prolong their lives. Or there weren't at the time. And basically the energy healer's work was able to make a statistically significant improvement in the lives of these mice, right? So the control mice maybe died within however, I'm making up the days because I forget, but let's just say it's 20 days, and maybe the experimental mice who got the energy healing lived 28 days. I will go look it up for the people who are like, well, that's not accurate, but that small subset that's going to get me in the comments, but and they're right. But the point is not only that, but in some mice, tumors didn't even form.
Right.
Or the tumors that were there started to die, depending on which experiments he was doing. And then one day the energy healer couldn't go, and he had to go take on the role of the energy healer. And long story short, for whatever reason, his method worked. And it actually has proven to be very effective. He's written at least one book on this. He's trained people to do his healings. He's written a number of scientific papers on this. So it's pretty remarkable.
Right.
But, in his paper, he was talking about things that, are important to think about. We are not the first generation, of course, of people to talk about energy healing.
Right.
And he actually was referencing Hippocrates in ancient times, recognizing that certain individuals seem to appear to be able to heal. And Hippocrates described this as the force which flows from many people's hands. The modern day kind of equivalent would be laying on of hands, prayer for healing, getting into various altered states of consciousness to heal. Healing touch is a specific type of energy healing. And actually, it's one of the more, I think, rigorous training methods. Just as an aside, I think it's a 4-year, it's equivalent to a degree program.
Right.
And there's a lot of supervised hours and clinical hours people have to do. And they actually have to do continuing education to maintain that certification. To me, Healing Touch is probably the most rigorous training program. Somebody else will at me. I think maybe equivalent to that is Barbara Brennan's healing method. And for people who don't know, Barbara Brennan was a NASA scientist, and she, long story short, but founded a school of healing. The training is very intense, but it can be very effective. Even if we want to think about things like Dr. Masaru Emoto, who
that's what comes to mind immediately. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that wasn't even necessarily laying hands on or sending energy to water. There have been, I believe, subsequent experiments like that with water. But that's just putting a nice word versus an awful word on the container.
Right.
And noticing how that affects water crystals. So,
and it's just the casual transference of, ideas or emotional, impact.
It's completely passive, right? Because you're writing love versus ugly on, 2 different beakers, and the one with the nice word, the crystals change accordingly, which is, pretty exciting. So Dean Radin, I've mentioned before, a lot of paranormalists will know his name. He's an incredibly bright and actually extremely funny man. Please go look up all of his YouTube talks because they're amazing. But he actually replicated or sought to replicate Masaru Emoto's work, incidentally. Probably much more rigorous scientific kind of structure to his study. The results were significant as well, but they weren't as dramatic in terms of beautiful crystals and the perfection in terms of how the crystals were, they're actually just perfect if you look at Masaru Emoto's book. I think he just took the best looking crystals, and those are the ones he showed, which I get. But, since ancient times, people have talked about healing and done healing. Remember, modern medicine is very different now than it was 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. And so the alternatives were the conventional in many ways.
Right.
So, I was looking through the research, and Dean Radin also, has done a number of other studies with healing intention and found significant effects. In the 1950s and 60s, the late biologist Bernard Grad at McGill University, he found that selected healers could influence the germination of plant seeds.
Right. I remember. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As well as their growth. And they could also cure seeds that had been shocked by exposure to a saline solution. So he was also, I guess, able to measure the ability of healers to reduce goiters and to stimulate wound healing in mice.
Mm-hmm.
So this stuff has been around for a long time, even in modern times. Dan Benor, I think he may have passed away as well a few years ago, but he examined the healing action of energy on everything from enzymes in the laboratory, fungi and yeasts, bacteria, plants, single-celled organisms, and so forth. But some of the criticisms people have are that these studies aren't as methodologically rigorous as they think they should be. It's a hard thing to study. Yeah, I mean, if you think something's not possible, also, you're not going to see funding or a lot of people interested or willing to risk their careers to study this. So
right.
the scientists who study this, many of them have had very successful conventional careers and reputations. And once you do
that afford them then the opportunity to pursue a passion project, I mean,
or they just say, I'm done with that, and whatever happens, happens.
This is also reminding me kind of dowsing. And, people being able to douse. And then there are certain industries that rely on dowsing. They just don't rely on it being proven because they don't care if it's proven. They only care if the person that's doing it is effective for them. So they're not necessarily investing in proving that dowsing works. They're just finding the best dowser to find them water or oil or, other things that they use. I mean, there are dowsers that, have found, amazing and important oil sites and well sites and different things like that all the time.
Absolutely. And I'm laughing because it's like, yeah, I'm sure the person who's having the dowser look for the oil well isn't publicizing that.
Yeah, and they don't care as long as the oil well is found, they don't care.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up dowsing because later, remind me, because I didn't write it down, but I want to mention a dowser who does a lot of healing work, but it's going to tie into some of our
sorry.
Was that Satan?
No, that was Finn, and I don't actually even know where he is. Finn is, and I apologize, Finn is angry with Lincoln because Lincoln is hoarding the bones.
Aw.
So, yeah.
So cute. I'm going to tell people you're traveling.
I am, as usual. As usual, I'm traveling.
Yeah, and the dogs are with you.
Yes.
So we love that. So, yeah, so some of the things to keep in mind as we talk about this is, what can we do with this? How do we know that there's any potential? And we do because there are a lot of different studies. Even if people have criticisms about the methodology, there's something there. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say there's more than something there. I'm just looking and actually another study by Gronowitz and colleagues that I found assessed a dose-dependent effect of therapeutic touch. Also, by the way, a fairly rigorous training program. It's more systematic. It's not just like, I'm going to send you energy, so I do.
Right.
But therapeutic touch, Gronowitz looked at the effects of therapeutic touch on the proliferation of different types of human cells in culture. Mm-hmm. So fibroblasts, tendon cells, and bone cells, otherwise known as osteoblasts. But they were treated with therapeutic touch, a sham treatment, or no treatment for 10 minutes per treatment with varying degrees of frequency for the treatments per week. That right there, that's a problem. we want to be pretty specific, but
Right.
basically they found that the tendon cells and the fibroblasts, but not the osteoblasts, demonstrated significant increases in cell proliferation. So there were more of them in the first week of treatment as compared to the ones who got nothing. The osteoblast cells had that same effect, but only after 2 weeks of treatment.
That's
so,
interesting.
Yes, because they're all human cells,
Right.
but there are 3 different types of cells, and their response to the treatment was different.
That's
in
really
terms
interesting.
of the dose you needed to get an effect.
Yeah, because then it implies, well, it implies this isn't like just positive thinking, or some kind of a placebo effect or something that
not on cells in a dish.
Well, and I mean that's interesting, right? I mean that just shows that there's some kind of interaction that's occurring.
Yeah.
That's not it's not just something that's blanketing all cells. It's interacting individually based on the type of cell. And that's interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, because we have medications that are targeted, right?
Right. Yeah.
No, you're not going to, I mean, so that makes sense to me somewhat. And, if we're thinking about this as a therapeutic agent, right? Even though it's intangible for the most part, certain things
to me,
need different doses.
To me, it's really interesting in that that there are different levels, because that to me is like supportive evidence of it being effective. Do you know what I mean? Can you give me 1 second, Traci? I apologize. I've been here for 4 days and they haven't made one sound since I've been here. But of course, we're on doing this. Take us and go upstairs.
Yeah. So, it's interesting, dose response, just like any other kind of, again, therapeutic agent. There was a study also about a Japanese energy healing method that I'm not actually as familiar with. I've heard of it, but it's not something I have direct experience of, but it's known as Johrei. I'm not sure if it's Johrei or Johrei. I should have looked that up, about how to pronounce that, but it was founded by Mokichi Okada in 1935. And according to Okada's doctrine, Johrei is essentially a method of spiritual purification attained by the transmission of divine energies, but without touching the recipient of the healing. So in this study I'm mentioning, there were 6 Johrei healers, each with a minimum of 10 years of experience. So they were considered to have experience. The premise is that they are transmitting energy to the recipient via something called O-Hikari. It's a blessed pendant worn around the level of the solar plexus.
Okay.
And in this study that I found, and I can put links to all these studies in the show notes, so anyone who wants to look them up can. But basically, they had various types of cancer cells that they seeded in appropriate amounts in these 96 well plates. So the various types of cancer cells that they had for the Johrei healers to work on were gastric cancer, malignant lymphoma, uterine cervix, epithelioid carcinoma, prostate carcinoma, and melanoma. And there were a few different prostate cancer cell lines. We won't get into the details of that, but people who are interested can look in the article. But the basic structure of this study was that the 6 healers did twice daily healing on their cell lines. I think everybody got the equivalent kind of section of all of the cell lines to do healing on. Mm-hmm. So the healers did twice daily healing for 15-minute sessions, so 30 minutes a day. And they did this over the course of only 3 to 4 days. And I'm not sure why there was even that variation, but there was. And then practitioners delivered the energy healing from about just under 6 inches away. Now, there were 2 control groups. One control group of cells. The cells are the participants in this case. So one control group received nothing. They were just set out across the room. Nothing happened to them. Mm-hmm. And then there was another control group that was treated by sham practitioners. So these are people who had no healing experience at all.
No training
at all. but no experience doing other types of healing either.
Right.
And no wearing of the ohikari. So what they found was the different cancer cell lines had different degrees of susceptibility to Johrei. I thought that was so interesting.
Right.
Again, all human
That is
cells.
interesting.
So the results of the study were interesting, right? So they're all human cancer cell lines. They all had different degrees of susceptibility to the Japanese healing method, the Johrei. So the researchers were interested in whether the energy healing would decrease the viability of these cancer cells. So if they would make them there would be more evidence of cell death. Right. So more dead or dying cells at 72 hours, so 3 days in, as well as fewer viable cells generally, that would tell them that there was, something going on.
Right.
If it was significantly different from the control group. So anyway, it was. What I find really interesting is the most affected cancer cells were the gastric cancer cells. The prostate cancer cells were the least susceptible. So it's interesting. And what else is interesting is that, because when I read about this, I was wondering what the healers were told to do. And I was wondering, were they sending intention to heal, or were they sending intention to harm because they're cancer cells?
Right. Kill the cells or heal the body. Right.
So what's interesting,
the effect would be the same, but the intention is different.
Well, remember though, there's no body. So the organism in this
I understand,
situation is, this is what I find so weird about this, or these are the questions that come up. So later in the article, you hear that the practitioners were directed at the beginning of the study, they just to send healing energy. That's it, to the cells. Sending healing energy to the cells killed them. They did not know that the cells in these dishes were malignant cells until after the study concluded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my first thought was, if you're just healing with the intention for the best and highest good, or, healing energy to the cells before you, I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if the exact opposite happened, that the cells flourished, that there were many more of them. But that isn't what happened. And it seems like the energy knew that the cells themselves were harmful. But because the cells weren't in an organism, they weren't really harmful to anyone.
Right.
There was no body to harm. So I thought that was just so weird.
Well, unless the interpretation of the person who was sending out the intention was that in order to send out healing, I have to kill, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That's a tough one. That's really interesting.
Right? Because I mean, you don't know what kind of cells they are. So theoretically, I'm thinking with most energy healers, it's like, the health of the organism, the highest good of the organism. But maybe there, if there is some higher wisdom, what is that? You know what I mean?
And
like, who's directing,
is it guiding this? Or is it?
Who knows that they're malignant?
No, that's
yeah.
That's weird. I mean, that's a wrinkle right there. That's a wrinkle in it.
Because that's very different from having plants in front of you or seeds and they're germinating better. Right. And if they were given no other instruction, I'm assuming that the plants would have done better and not died. You know? So it seems to matter who. One thing that they found is that it seemed to matter who did the energy healing, in the sense of, even among the healers, there was variability in terms of the effect from individual healers.
Right.
Even though they all had a minimum of 10 years. So that's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. All right. We should just say they're ghost dogs, because I have to tell you, now
he's not even reacting to Lincoln. He's just kind of reacting. I think now he's just reacting to me being here.
Well, he can't hear my voice. Well, maybe he can. I mean, you have headphones on. So I was thinking, like,
I don't think he can. No, and he can't. He can't. But he's seen me watch TV. Like, he knows what I'm doing.
I'm just another person on
TV.
Yeah,
you're just a TV.
But the questions that come up, or the issues that come up, are, what's the difference between one healer and another, and why is there a difference? The type of cell, like how does it know that, or why does it affect one type of cell differently from another, either in terms of it taking longer or more energy for it to be helpful, or for an energy healer who's sending positive intention, how does it,
and is there
orchestrating whether the cell is going to die or live?
Is there something to the subconscious of the sender that is more impactful than the consciousness of it? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Or is there some kind of a connection between the two that is not, is not something that we're conscious of, but is happening? Like not just an attack on the cell, but some kind of actual communication and negotiation. You know what I mean? Where there's a learning and an understanding that is happening on a level that we're not conscious of.
I love that you're using the word unconscious, because, somewhat, like, I know, like, a lot of the remote viewers will use subconscious because they feel like a part of it's somewhat accessible versus inaccessible.
Right.
But that's how remote viewing works. You're subconscious, right? Or something beyond the level of conscious awareness. I just typically use unconscious because that's my training.
Right.
But it is happening. Like, how do you get a randomly generated number and tune into a target accurately that could be across the world or distant in time, right?
I mean,
is it the same thing?
Like tapping into a world wide web of, unconscious, unconscious thoughts, knowledge, images, ideologies, philosophy, all of those things. And then kind of like very, very rapidly beyond our awareness, getting there. You know what I mean? Like it's fascinating.
I'm kind of laughing because, like, as you were talking about World Wide Web, I was thinking, but who's typing in the search bar, and how do they know what to type? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there is something beyond us, I think.
Right. I mean, it's like the Akashic record or something along those lines, where I think it was Blavatsky, right? Helena Blavatsky, who kind of introduced Western theology to the idea of the Akashic record, which is everything, everywhere, all the time, and that you can tap into it, but that your consciousness is not necessarily, your consciousness is not a separate being, but it's mostly a separate being from, say, your sub or your unconsciousness, so that there are parts of you that have abilities and have knowledge and have access that the part of you that is conscious is not aware of. You know what I mean? That you're a much
100%.
larger being than.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
By the way, next time I mess anything up, I'm going to blame my subconscious.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was my unconscious being.
I'm not aware, and I have no responsibility.
I was not aware of that. I'm sorry.
Other things to keep in mind, though, so the Johrei healers don't need to touch the person, right? And same thing with Reiki, same thing with many other energy healing methods. And in fact, many of them, you don't even need to be with the person. I would go even farther and say it is possible for someone to do the healing session at a different time, even at a future time, and possibly create healing in the past.
Right.
Which is a whole other branch to this topic. But another question, though, I have is just things for us to think about. Like, okay, so we have sham practitioners. And I don't know if the sham practitioners, the people who are not trained, had no experience in any type of healing, energy or otherwise. What about purposefully instructing them not to think about anything?
Right.
Or to not think negative thoughts, not think positive thoughts.
Right.
And that's actually harder if the organism is not a cell in a dish, but like mice, right?
Right.
So if you have empathy and compassion for those mice, I would imagine you are transmitting something that is, if healing energy isn't loving energy, what is it? I think there's all kinds of potential questions that we should be asking. And,
ethically, what if you direct them to do something negative? Or if they're given incorrect information, I mean, I guess if we're talking about the subconscious and the unconscious, then the accuracy of their conscious knowledge would not really necessarily be important. But if
I think it is, but I hear what you're saying.
But what if someone's like, make that cancer grow? You know what I mean? Like, there could be that could be scary.
Yeah. Well, 100%. But what you just said is related also to another question I had, is like, is it ethical to try to harm any organism, whether it's cancer cells or, a plant or a mouse? I don't think anybody has a problem with killing cancer cells. I certainly don't.
Right.
Hopefully people aren't doing research trying to harm anything else, like, any sort of actual,
Well, I mean, the things that we do overtly, I mean, we definitely think it's okay to have animal testing.
I mean, I don't, but
no, I mean, I mean, as a society,
yeah,
definitely, as provided it's done, for very specific reasons.
So another question is, can you harm someone with your intention or energy? Now that's a provocative question for a number of reasons, because there are a lot of people who are, heavily medicated now, or spending a lot of time someplace because, it's considered a mental disorder to believe that you can harm anything with your mind.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can heal something with your intention, as with energy healing, if you could, and I don't even mean cure, I mean just affect change.
Right.
If you can affect change for the better, well, could somebody use mental intention or distort energy healing to be harmful? Or could it inadvertently be harmful?
My thing is if you can do it positively, you can do it negatively, right? That would be my belief. That would be what my understanding would be. So what I would be concerned about is the kind of passive, unconscious of doing that without intention of doing that. So you're angry with somebody, or you can't stand, Vladimir Putin. I can't stand that guy, or something else. And then because you are having that, and you're doing, your feelings are so strong. But I would argue that we do that every day. Like, I feel that, I always say that, like, that water experiment was very, very impactful to me, because essentially, the idea was what you think about something is actually physically affecting it in some way, right? So your personal feelings about that are in some way, and our collective feelings, but your personal individual feelings about something was affecting something. And especially with water, because we're like 75% water. So if you're looking at, I always think of it in high school, if you're in high school and you're like, oh my God, I can't stand them, or I think it's probably true. I think we probably do affect each other that way, and it's awful,
I'm just laughing because, the good thing, our thought balloons are generally private, not entirely, I guess. But, I mean, everybody's had somebody in their personal life, even if it's for a short period of time, where they've been so angry, or either called the person names, or, said, go to hell, or like blah, 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 or something quite a bit worse. Public figures, especially polarizing public figures. I think our country is as polarized as it's ever been. It feels like that. I don't know if people's thoughts are canceling each other out, you know, if it were a fully reliable thing, I think
we'd be in danger. We'd be in a lot of danger.
Yes, we'd all be in so much danger. So, although it's funny because Jay actually thinks that I have the power to, make things happen, which I think is hilarious. It's a whole other story, but
yeah, but you know what?
Funny
maybe in
incidents.
His world you do. Do you know what I mean? Like you have,
you better,
there was a movie in the 80s called Scanners. And essentially this is what it was these were these guys and they had this power, not just guys, it was women too, but they had these powers and, some government, probably the CIA or some other subset of the government, essentially would give them targets and they would focus on these targets and trace, spoiler alert, they would blow their heads off, but the whole idea was that they had exhibited these kind of strengths as children and had been trained to develop them like a muscle and then were able to be used to, they were weaponized, and, I would say if we accept the positive outcome, if we accept that we can heal and we accept that even when the healing is positive for the person and negative for the, for the cell or the organism, then I think we have to accept that the opposite would be true as well. That we would be able to target something else that would be that would have a negative impact.
Well, it's so interesting too, because you think about it, when the cancer cells I'm just thinking of that example, like are inside of a person, you are taking the same organism and your healing intention is with healing the majority of that organism and aimed at destroying, these kind of errant cells,
right?
These cells that have kind of gone rogue, basically.
I think one of the things that we're also doing here is we're looking at something in kind of a very linear way and kind of looking at something and saying, we're going to look at this compartment of a much larger thing, right? And so there might be a whole lot of other things going on that we're not really looking at because we're looking at this specific thing. So,
100%. And it is very mechanistic and linear to look at it. Like, as the questions I have, I realize are like, they're not the most mind-blowing questions, but to me, they're just like the things like the natural questions you would have. Like, what is the secret ingredient? Is that secret ingredient different across different healing traditions? Nobody knows.
What would be interesting to know too
matter more than or no,
in that study, did the emblem or the necklace that they were wearing, did that impact? So there were people who were wearing it, there were people who weren't wearing it. I wonder if actually wearing it or having that device, whether or not it was more effective with that device. Because
like if the Johrei healers had taken the necklaces off, would they still be as effective? Right. Their tradition is that is the way the healing is transmitted. So for them, just having that belief system, I would think they would be less effective. I don't believe that any of the sham practitioners wore that. And also you're like not
as well.
Supposed to.
Yeah. Or if they secretly had it, you know what I mean? Like someone slipped it on them, they didn't know what it was, something like that.
Like, is that the secret ingredient? Is that sufficient on its own? And I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, again, there's no potential for a placebo effect with cells. If it were people, seeing that might make somebody think, well, you must be the real healer, not the sham.
Right.
But, intention, generally people will say intention is important in healing. It's important in intuitive work. Is it something else? I had it written down, can you harm someone even with good intentions? I mean, there's like this whole aspect of the web where people are saying, Reiki's dangerous and energy healing is dangerous and this ruined my life. And, I take that with a grain of salt. But do I think somebody could intentionally affect someone else's physiology negatively? Maybe. I don't know what the conditions would need to be. I wanted to tie this into a few other things that are different from the studies, but we've talked about, or I've talked about, even on my regular, more kind of, more normal podcast, not fully normal, but not fully mainstream, but manifesting, I've spoken about quite a lot. That is using your intention to bring about a specific type of event.
I mean, listen,
spellcasting,
positive thinking. Like how many times have you gone to the doctor where they've just been, hey, you have to keep it positive? We live in a society that casually kind of throws about these terms, like, hey, positivity breeds positivity. There's whole marketing campaigns for virtually everything that say that. So I would say that the Western culture has a certain level of buy-in on that. And, we also have a certain level of buy-in on negative thinking. Like, no wonder that he's, that guy is always so negative. He's always so down. No wonder he's sick. Or I can't be around that guy because he brings me down. Right. I'm picking on that guy, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't feel good when I'm around that person. And for whatever that is, whether it's us picking up on the energy or picking up on their negative thoughts. And then you also wonder are your feelings about that person being negative feeding into their negativity?
Feeling so down. Yeah. Oh,
we're getting it. There's a rabbit hole here, Traci. We're in a rabbit hole here.
I do think there's something to that. And again, I don't think, and again, maybe it's a dose response thing too, is that maybe if I'm thinking, Joe Schmo's a downer, maybe I have some impact, but maybe that's different from Joe Schmo's entire community thinking that, although we can never separate that from the actual very mundane experience. I'm going to set that aside for a second because we can go down all kinds of rabbit holes, but remote influencing is the second to last thing I wanted to mention, because about remote viewing. Remote influencing is something that officially the military guys were told not to try to do, not to try and influence anything else. But we know that people have developed techniques of remote influencing. And I won't get into detail about how you do that. But, remote influencing, again, if you're doing intention for healing, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through using a specific controlled remote viewing technique, which is what I'm referring to, or whether you are talking about, again, laying on of hands or Reiki or whatever, right? You're trying to influence someone in a specific way to some extent. But, how is that different from, how is remote influencing different from laying on of hands versus casting a spell versus doing manifesting work and having your vision board and all that? And I don't know, because how often are our wishes and intentions for healing for ourselves or somebody else? Or maybe for not healing. All right. So oddly enough, or maybe not oddly, if you've watched the show, Kathy is, as I said, in Provincetown, and she lost power completely. So her computer shut down, recording stopped on her end. So I'll wrap it up. But basically, some really interesting questions about, well, what is energy? What is energy healing? How much control do we have over it? Does it have an intelligence of its own? The last thing I wanted to mention that I, would have mentioned to Kathy if she were still able to connect right now, but dowsing. Kathy started talking about dowsing, which often is thought of as a way to look for things, right? Look for oil, look for water, and so forth. But some of you may be familiar with the healer Raymond Grace, who is a very well-known dowser who's done this for a long time. I've actually used his healing meditation quite a bit. And there's only a handful of meditations that I actually use. So that's, I guess a shout out to Raymond. And my one light just went out. Weird. But The reason I'm mentioning dowsing is if you followed Raymond Grace or listened to his talks on YouTube, he talks about using dowsing for healing specifically. And he says it's intention. He is not huge on procedures and steps. He has some, but long story short, a lot of it is visualization, intention, belief. So to what extent are those the, secret ingredients for all energy healing? I don't know. If you have questions or thoughts, even more exciting, about energy healing or any of the stuff we've talked about, please let us know. Really, send us an email on our website, curious-explorers.com. Leave us a comment on YouTube. Certainly, please rate and review the podcast wherever you catch it. But share your stories of energy healing, whether it's healing that you did, whether it's healing you received, or some other thing you'd like to share. We want to know. And let us know what other topics you'd really like us to talk about and cover, if there are places you want us to investigate and so forth, if there are things in Kathy's museum you want to know more about. But either way, thanks so much for listening. We love doing this show for you and for us too. And until next time, of course, stay curious and keep exploring. Bye for now.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen. The paranormal is real. It is real. The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real. It is real. The paranormal is real.